Hi, Babushka. I hope you're doing okay out there. This song that I'm playing right now reminds me of the second part of this story of the brothers, Fleetwood Mac. And as you well know, that's always been my favorite band ever, especially Mick Fleetwood. And it's funny looking back in the day of going through my mom and her dying. I dated a drummer, but that's another story. But I was always obsessed with their music and the collaboration of all that talent and how Mick Fleetwood held them all together. And it always reminds me of the man that I'm going to talk about here now. And Babushka, you know this man. You know him, or you knew him when you were a child. When I was going through the beginning stage through the end of that awful divorce to your stepfather, I reached out to this man because I had reached out to him many times before, and it had been 10 years or more since him and I had really talked, and I needed his advice because of the skills that he had in raising his family and the trials and tribulations that he had gone through. And yeah, at that time during my divorce, him and I fell in love. Or did we? I don't know. Looking back on it now, it probably could have worked, although I would have taken a whole different road in my life. And I don't think I would have been able to develop psychologically and socially as I have been now that you see today. And I may have still been stuck in that pit, with the monsters and the PTSD. Who knows? But let's get into it. This is a story about Michael Aaron. Aaron means the mountains. And he was a very stable person at the time, or he tried to be. And he tried to give me that stability too. But just like the music in Fleetwood Mac, when an adult reaches out to a young teenage girl, an adult guy, with all good intentions, rumors spread. And back then, 15 years old, I was a dumb girl, and gossip makes geese. And I could be a goose too when I wanted to be. And it did have its repercussions. So, let me get a drink here. Clear my throat because I got a lot to say on this one. What I'm going to say too is going to piss off a lot of my family members because they know that they had a dirty hand in it. So before we go too far into this, I want to bring up another word here. The special word of this. But what I am telling is the truth. So, Mom is mostly at home, and it's dark in the house. And I believe I had just broken up with my high school sweetheart over something stupid, another rumor that was led by another girl, and I was angry. I had a lot of anger in me, and I could not define it. Things were going down in the environment around me, trying to hold stuff together. Now, I had known and helped out this teacher in the past, helping with decorating some of his stages. He was head of the English department. On top of that, he was also head of the school newspaper and the yearbook. Great, great person. A lot of people depended on him and held him with a lot of high self-esteem. But going to class one day, the previous year, remember I told you about a girl named Patricia, okay? Patty. Our lockers were near each other. We played volleyball together. We would talk about religion and faith. She was so into being Catholic. I was going to the Church of the Nazarene at the time. But we would talk, and she would tell awesome, wonderful stories about what it was like to be in theater class. I was too shy, and I didn't have time for that stuff. At that point in my life, I knew I would have to give up sports or other activities. I did concentrate on the art club, though. At this point, my other friend and I, Jasmine, and some other students, we got together. We were painting murals all over the school walls and whatnot, decorating everything. It was great because her and I were at the helm of the whole thing, and we could really use our imagination. It was wonderful. Patty, though, not very artistic. I don't know why she really wanted to hang out with me. Looking back on it, I think she really had a crush on me. It could have led to something. I don't know. There was something about her that I didn't like, though. But she would talk about personal things, a lot of drama going on at her church, the Catholic church, in the main part of the downtown of Burnside. Oh my God. She would compliment this teacher about all his skills, and that one day during class, a class that she was in, his back was to the students as he's writing on the chalkboard, and he's listing the 10 Commandments. And then he focused on the one commandment about thou shalt not kill. And he marks it like a one, slash. And he goes, how is that any different than this commandment over here? Thou shalt not lie. And he has a bunch of slash marks, like 20 of them. He goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He goes, how is this one any more important than this one here? And then she's sitting there as we're going to class. We close our locker doors and whatnot. We're going to class. And she's like, he's a terrible man. Absolutely awful. And ugly as sin. And I'm thinking, he's supposed to wear glasses, but he doesn't. And I'm thinking in my mind, well, what's wrong with that? You know? And just criticize. And then she was opening up the gates, the floodgates of this pissy gossip. Because he was married with 4 kids. The oldest son is a year older than me, same age as Patty. The other 3 kids were little. See, he was married twice. His first wife, she came from Japan. And somehow the marriage didn't work out. She went back to Japan. No big deal. But he was a single father. So he remarries one of, a top girl. Her father was one of the leading lawyers in the town and a strong influence within that church that Patty was going to. Now, this teacher, later on, he opened up to me about why he made certain choices that he made. But gosh, she criticized him. She's like, his wife and him are now getting a divorce. And she talked as though it was the wife's decision. But she goes, I go to church one day with my family. Mr. Aaron, he's a bishop over there. A bishop in the Catholic Church is someone who helps the priest. They involve in distribution of the communion and the readings out of the gospel. Stuff like that, They kind of serve in a way as a type of altar boy. You got the altar boys there helping out. But then you have these adults who help out too. And they take that job very seriously, as he did. But they're all in church, and his wife's in there too. She's in there with another guy. And she goes up to the front, to the altar, where everybody kind of walks, and takes turns to take communion. And the priest flat out denies her in front of everybody her right to have communion. And then later on she's told by the priest, and I guess Mr. Aaron was standing right there. He enforced it. He made sure that the priest knew, and it was on record, that she was being excommunicated. She could no longer take communion. She could come into the church if she wanted to for services, but she didn't count. That's a big to-do. That's like putting a scarlet letter on somebody. See, that's what your grandfather, John, had done to me. And because I sided with my mother, they took me off the baptismal records. I was excommunicated. Well, my mom had that reinstated. Big deal. But I'm sitting there listening to all of this, and I'm like, wow. And then she was talking about how much of an ugly person he was, and how ugly he was physically. And I'm like, ugly? He looks just like the actor from Quantum Leap. And anyways, who cares? It would go on and on and on, and it would never end. And then she would turn around and talk about how fun his class was. Well, the one and only time that I skipped a class, I skipped driver's ed. Makes a lot of sense because I don't like to drive. But it was an opportunity to go see one of the school plays that he did. And it was the play Harvey, the imaginary bunny. It was good. They had it going on in the gym, and it was the one and only time I could go see it. I ended up serving detention just to go do that. You know, there were no teachers that I had at the time who would organize time around where I could go see this. So, Patty, it was affiliated where she could go see it, no problem. But with me, I had to sneak out. Jeez, I was such a bad girl, huh? I think the only bad thing I did was smoke pot a couple of times and then go smoke cigarettes out in the parking lot. But anywho. So, I served the detention. And then I had him that year for 1/4 for study hall. And I remember my history teacher, before I was going into that study hall class, he says, "Hey, I want you to deliver this little note to Mr. Aaron for me." I'm like, okay. So I go into the study hall class and I give it to him. He was the most serious man on earth, staring down at his desk, looking at his book. I put it on his desk. He doesn't even look up to me. He just kind of, as he's still looking at his book reading, he just reaches over for the note and just takes it and puts it in his pocket. He looked like he was depressed and in pain. So we're going to fast forward again back to the last couple months before Mom passed. I have a creative writing class, and it happens to be Mr. Aaron's class. And it happens to be the first class of the day. So it's also the homeroom, okay? The beginning of the school day. He wants us all to write about ourselves and to write about what's going on in our lives. Anything. Just to be creative. Just to scratch things down. So I did. Oh, Lord. I talk about the pit and struggling to climb out. Back in the 80s, it was a popular thing too, about you're stuck in a tunnel and you see a light at the end of the tunnel and you're trying to get to that light to get through it. So I write it, turn it in. The next day I get it back. He gives me a B+, written in red, and underneath it, he's like, written down, it says, "Come talk to me." So I wrote down a lot of shiza. Few things going on in my family, and the situation about my mom, and how the curtains were drawn, and everything was dark. And about how her health, going in and out and in and out. And the pressures I was under. And then trying to reach out to my family and them being unresponsive. And then also about growing up with a father who had suffered from poliomyelitis. Having the post-polio syndrome. So, he holds me back after class. We talk for a few minutes, and he's like, "Do you want to see me after school? This is some serious stuff here." And at that time, I was afraid and ashamed because I see what all the other kids are going through. You know, they're going to school, they're in sports, dating, you know, getting ready for homecoming, talking about the football games coming up. You know, it's fall. Everything's just happy-go-lucky, you know? And I didn't like talking about my private life and my struggles. It was kind of like the first talking about it. I had talked a little bit about things with a school counselor, but not to that extent, you know. To me, in my old life in Humbleton, how I was raised, I was taught to think that that was a normal way of society. It was just different, you know. They had their own rules, like I said, their own laws, their own to-dos. It's confusing. So, I meet with him the next day after school. I had time. I had a day off from work that day. I had about, I don't know, 2 or 3 days off during the week. And I made sure I had my homework done ahead of time. It was the beginning of the school year. So the curriculum, you know, there weren't any finals or, you know, deadlines yet. And I always wanted to stay on top of that. By then I was learning never to procrastinate. You know, I didn't have time to. And there were challenges with me too, because, you know, I don't know. In school and stuff, I wasn't that good. I had dyslexia and didn't even realize it. And then the challenges with math, that would always scramble my brain, you know. I just didn't have a way of going about it yet. That's another story that goes way, way forward. But, so he sits in a chair. The chair's backwards, but he sits on the chair, and he turns and he faces me. And I go into my turtle mode, you know, the slouching over and staring, you know. Usually I'd be staring in a book or staring at my artwork, you know, working on something, you know, and then once in a while I'd look up at the other people, what's going on, or I'd be talking to friends. But most of the time I like to stay in my own little world. But he makes me sit up. He makes me come out of my shell. And we really talk. We really talk. First, he starts engaging about himself. And he goes, you know, I know what polio is all about. I'm like, well, most people don't. Especially people my age, you know. Because my dad was 20 years older than my mom, you know, like a generation gap there. The only people I could relate to as children of polio victims who got polio as adults, okay, were Mr. Aaron's generation, okay? I don't know if that makes any sense. There are a lot of adults who came down with poliomyelitis, and it wasn't just a full type of paralysis. There's a lot of celebrities out there who got a small, like a partial polio paralysis, where they can function and move around, but it doesn't mean that they didn't go through some form of pain. So you have, the singer Joni Mitchell, or actors like Alan Alda. You can look it up. Martin Scorsese, I believe, too. You know? And so he's explaining to me that his father went through that, but was able to hold down a job. And he worked hard as a construction worker. But it doesn't mean that it didn't affect the family. His dad was also a heavy drinker. I described that in the paper I had turned into him about my dad. My dad was mostly a social drinker, but he was a crying drunk and would kind of use me as an enabler, you know. It's so funny. I used to think that wine was cough medicine, or at least the wine that my dad drank. Not the wine that my mom's dad made, that Grandpa Ed made, not at all. But it was weird how that affected me psychologically as a child. My dad would call it his cough medicine. And he would pretend like he'd be coughing, and he'd ask me to go get him his medicine. And as a little girl, I would. We talked about all that stuff. But his dad used to drink so much that Mr. Aaron told me when he was young, at the age of 15, he would take all the leftover bottles of whiskey and he'd marry them all together into one bottle. And then he'd go and sell it to some of his friends. And he'd have some extra pocket money. We talked about those things. And he's like, you have to have a connection of people that you can relate to about this stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, I did. When I was a young girl and we were all affiliated with the Paralyzed Veterans of America, it wasn't necessarily, paraplegics who had the condition that my dad had, but I could relate to kids and other adults whose family members had some form of paralysis, whether it was getting injured in battle, this or that, but the whole canes and braces and wheelchair thing, his father didn't need, a brace. Maybe in the beginning he did. But like I said, he was able to function. Doesn't mean that his body didn't go through a lot of pain. And it affected Mr. Aaron's whole family. We figured out we had some kind of connection. He was the youngest, and his mother had remarried. His dad was the stepdad of his siblings. Kind of put a rift on things. Kind of singled him out. In a way, he was a turtle as well. And it was hard for him growing up, especially with his dad being a construction worker. They had to move all over. He grew up in southern Oregon. He lived for a time in Eugene, University of Oregon. But they would always have to pick up and move. It felt unstable for him. And he could never keep the same friends for very long. He tried to, though. So we talked about these things. We also talked about him being a Vietnam vet, and I'm like, well, what was it like? I liked to talk to veterans about what they went through and situations and risks that they took and connections that they made and what they learned. Well, he wasn't stationed in Vietnam. Ironically, I'm going to need a cigarette for this one. I'll just take 2 puffs. but he was stationed in Turkey. In the army. They did work to spy on the Russians. And I'm like, okay, so what's the most dangerous situation you were in where you felt like your life was at risk? Did you experience gunfire? Did you experience stuff? And he's like, no, nothing like that. He said the one situation that him and his buddies were in one day that put all their lives at risk, where they could have been shot and killed. They accidentally stumbled upon some kind of river or something, or a lake, some kind of body of water. And there was a group of women, young women, and they were bathing naked or half naked in that body of water. And some of the buddies kind of looked at it, laughing and wanting to stay around. But then the others, especially the guy in charge of the group, they were like, oh God, what the hell? Because if there were any of the Turkish men out there, any of those soldiers who would have seen them, or even civilians, just for stumbling into that, they would have been killed. No joke. And I thought it was one hell of a story. It was great. But then he focused on me, and he said, you know, you do realize your mother is going to die, that she is in the dying process. When an animal gets ready to go, they usually crawl into a cave or a dark space. That rang a bell in me. It really did. And it brought reality to my brain. And he's like, you know, I'm going to be here for you. And I'm going to try and see it through with you. And he did. He let the other teachers know. He let the principal know. He did what he could, you know, for everybody to support me and be there for me when the time would come. We didn't know when it was going to come. And I still had hopes in my heart that things might get better. And he also told me, he said, usually young people don't go through this. They just don't. Or if they do go through this kind of situation, they have a form of support system, which I did not have. Not really. Not the one that I needed. So we talked about things. And I would meet him after school often, whenever I would have some free time. Well, and he would make me laugh. He had a great sense of humor. You could imagine the rumors that were starting to spread. And me being a young, stupid girl, I'd kind of joke around with it, not realizing, you know, how things can be taken out of proportion. People just go with it. They put two and two together. They joke around about it, especially the girls. Oh my God. But you know, where else to go with this one? We would talk about me growing up in the Catholic Church. And I told him about how it affected me growing up in that Catholic community and then being excommunicated, and how it really broke Mom's heart and how I could care less. Well, he explained to me that he grew up being Baptist, Protestant, and how that affected him, and how that was all shoved down his throat. and how he rebelled against it. And as an adult, before he got married, he had converted on his own choice, into the Catholic faith and what it meant to him. And I had met some good Catholics and whatnot, people who went in with all good intentions. And it made me think, that there are good people out there. It's okay. And it's okay to debate about things, to debate about theology, and to debate about life. So, after my mom died, instead of, like I told you before, instead of going to the Church of the Nazarene, because Brad didn't want me to go, I went that following Sunday, which was the next day, to that church in Burnside, the Catholic Church. And I knew that my being there would be a shout out, just my presence being there, and to go up and to receive communion would tell that teacher, Mr. Aaron, that something was wrong, that something was up, and that it happened. He saw me. He saw me when I walked up to take the host in my mouth. And he saw me go back. He was there, not his ex-wife that I know of. And then Patty was sitting next to me, pointing out who is who and what is what and who's there and blah, 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 whispering in my ear. And I wanted to concentrate. I actually took the rosary with me to pray. And she just wouldn't stop whispering in my ear like a little agitating bug. But he saw me and he knew. And then the next day, after that Sunday, because at that point too, I had called my job and I said, I'm going to need some time off here. I'm going to have to figure stuff out. Because I think that following Sunday night, one of the police officers came to visit and check up on me. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, oh yeah, that's a good idea until we can get all this together. And then the phone was ringing constantly nonstop when it never used to ring, of certain relatives and friends of the family. And it was always telling them the same story over and over again. And but it wasn't, what can we do to help you? It was, oh, well, I got this thing going on over here, but I'll talk to so-and-so. And I think your sister is trying to get things organized. And I'm like, okay, fine. I was really in a daze and in a lot of shock. So here, we're going to talk about the Monday. I need one more puff for this. It's making me a little verklempt, but that's okay. Sometimes I know it like the back of my hand. But it's in bits and pieces, kind of like pieces to a crazy quilt. So let me get a chance to focus here. The following Monday, I was told not to by the police officer, but I did go to school. I had to. I had to stay ultra focused. I couldn't just be at home. I couldn't just be there, because at that time I was trying to clean around her bed and stuff. But just to be at home, I thought I would go nuts. So I thought, yeah, I'll concentrate on my studies. And these people got to know about this somehow anyways, so we're going to just do it. So that Monday, right in the morning, that classroom's full. My seat, I used to like to sit up front because then I could stay ultra focused and see the chalkboard more clear. Right when the bell rang, he had me come up and go into the room There was a separate room where students could work on stuff having to do with, the school yearbook or the newspaper. And then it led to another room where people would develop their photographs and stuff, a kind of dark room. But he took me into the first part where it had all the computers and the layouts and stuff. And he gave me a hug. And he reassured me that everything was going to be okay and to not give up. I couldn't cry. I couldn't cry. And I knew, and he knew, I was in a state of shock. Because my hands were purple. The circulation was just not happening as it should. But he assured me that he was going to be there for me, to support me. The other teachers knew too, and they were supportive. And I was so wanting to turn in all my assignments on time and to do a good job. But there were times I couldn't even think. And they'd be like, don't worry about it. Just do what you can, turn in what you have, and we'll go from there. There was a lot to do during that time. My guardian, we're going to call her Gina. She wasn't my guardian yet, but she was getting the paperwork ready, along with her new husband. I had actually gone to her wedding the year prior and met one of her husband's nephews, who was a couple years older than me. And we met, and there was kissing, a little bit of romance. It was before I dated the drummer. Nothing came out of it, but my guardian was wanting me to make the decision to live with her. She knew that it was my choice because of my age. Now, the police officers, on the other hand, were wanting me to slow down and think about things, but they assured me that this would be my decision. My sister was doing the best she could to try and convince me too, to live with my guardian, that that would be the best thing for me. And she told me straight to my face, well, she's getting ready for an estate sale to sell everything, and going through all the paperwork and the bills and whatnot. She told me that her and her husband, this is my older sister, were too selfish to take me in. Says a lot. At least she was honest. But it does say a lot. Because if I was in the same situation, it wouldn't have been that way. I know. We think about things differently. Mom used to say that even though there was a 10-year age gap between us, that we had a lot more in common that we knew. And Mom's wish was that my sister and I would end up close. I don't know. I tried. But we're two different people. I realized later on it had a lot to do with socio-economical class, but that's another story. So, I'm trying to stay focused, trying to decide, trying to think of doing the right thing. What would be in my best interest? And I was exhausted. When you're in shock, you're not thinking clearly. And I didn't know at the time, but I knew later on in life that when you go through a calamity or a tragedy like that, not to make any sudden moves. But in my mind, I kind of wanted to start my life over again. And talking to my friends and stuff, because everything there was connected to the goodness that I had with my mom. It would make me grieve. And these adults, my guardian, her husband, and he was a happy-go-lucky guy, they were convincing me that starting my life all over with them and around her husband's family and some of her family too, that it would give me a new beginning. Now, Mr. Aaron, he agreed. I would tell him, these are the choices that I have, this is what I might do. And I told some of the other teachers as well. And he's like, maybe it is a good thing. It's a sudden thing, it's the beginning of the school year, but it's kind of good that it's in the beginning of the school year. You can start your life over again and actually have a normal life as a teenager. That meant a lot. And so, also, going back on the whole excommunication thing, he became a lot more lenient towards his ex-wife. He explained to me what went down. His wife was younger than him, which was very common, and the age difference between him and his soon-to-be ex-wife, that was nothing compared to the 20-year difference between my mom and my dad, or my mom's parents. There was a 15-year age difference. And the people in my old community of Humbleton, there were girls who got married as young as the age of 14, 15 years old. And then also in Burnside too, depending on your culture, depending on your religion. It happened a lot. But he had told me he was happy in his marriage, and that his wife, he didn't mind if she was a waitress on the side. It was extra income. And he explained to me that 5 years into the marriage, his wife had cheated on him. He forgave her. And they had a big family. They had 4 kids. But at her waitressing job, a couple years prior to him telling me this, she had cheated on him again with one of her co-workers. Guy's a heavy drinker. Guy took a lot of drugs. And then on top of that, she cheated on the guy with another guy she was working with. I guess those 2 men that were her affairs, her amours, got into a big fist fight and were threatening to kill each other in the middle of the parking lot where she worked over in Salem. And she called Mr. Aaron in a panic, in a frenzy, saying, they're threatening to kill each other. And he rushed over, he drove there to get in between it and to make it calm down and stop, at least for her sake. I told him about how my father, with all his anger and being led on by other men in the community and by my oldest brother, that he had been trying to starve my mom and I, to try and psychologically beat us into submission. I didn't tell him everything, but I told him the main points. And I think it made him put things in a different perspective, because he had a lot of anger in him. in his divorce, even though his ex got custody of the three main children. She wasn't the real mother of the oldest. And besides, the oldest was turning 18. She got full custody. The children didn't want to live with her. They wanted to live with their father. That being said, he was court ordered not only to pay child support. It's in the state of Oregon. You not only pay child support, but you also pay alimony to the wife. And he did. He didn't argue it. He held a second job on the weekends, like one class, working at a community college, ironically, the same community college where my parents met, teaching English, teaching basic writing stuff, just to make those payments work. And, it all worked out in the end. He did the best he could. And eventually, he remarried another teacher. But I'll tell you something. We would write to each other, and we would talk, and I would write little things in my diary. I felt it was ironic because this man, he's Libra. That's the entity of justice and the laws. And to balance that out, it's actually a goddess. I forget her name. I should research that more. But she is flying in the air with her scales. Okay? And there's wars and battles going on. And she's communicating with all these soldiers about what is just and what is not just. My oldest brother, Jack, is a Libra too. And when I was growing up as a child, he was my favorite sibling. He was the only one I would really appreciate or have fun with who could mess around and tease me, or tickle me, or play tricks on me. I held him in high esteem until he started turning into a version of this right here, with fangs and evil and sociopath tendencies. Sometimes there are people out there and they're angels for you. You just can't see their wings. At the same time this is going on and I'm communicating with this man and in the middle of transitioning and giving up everything that I had known in that short period of time. But when you're young, that short period of time is a long period of time for you. It's part of your development. A lot of stuff got sold. We had a yard sale. A lot of stuff ended up missing. There's nothing more painful, or during that time, and the third guy in this trilogy of the brothers, Tim, you remember because you were there. You have this huge yard estate sale. Everything's open. Not working anymore. I think maybe it happened on a Sunday. It was a Saturday, Sunday. Coming home from the Nazarene church. And Tim, you were with me and a few other people. The door of my house is open. There's a bunch of stuff laying out in the front. There's a bunch of women involved. Some women I know, Some women I don't know, but I'm going to get to know in the future. Everything's being sold. Everything is being exposed, including my bedroom. My bed, the bed frame, which used to be my grandma's, beautiful maple. It's up for sale. There's a price tag on it. Incredible. My stuff is packed. I'm transitioning. I think I had half of my things, down in the new town. And it was just awful. So there's this lady, this kind of prissy woman, I don't know. She's rummaging through things, and she's like, everything's so beautiful. What's going on? Did somebody die? Tim, I don't know if you remember, but I told her straight to her face, yeah, my mom died. And the woman, she made a spectacle of it. She grabs me by my shoulders and she's going, oh, you poor thing. I can't imagine how you can go through this. And that's when it hit. So I'm kind of in and out of the shock, making a decision and then wanting to think about it more. I know this is a long video, but it's important. So, you're dealing with a family. You're trying to make things right. I was trying to make things right for myself. But can you imagine that there's so many family to-dos and secrets that are kept hidden underneath in order to keep up appearances, in order to look good? So many things buried deep down. You know who the real monsters are, but you're not allowed to talk about it. Okay? And then the women in your life, or the women in my life, if I would even mention things like that, they would Pollyanna it or change the subject or move on to other things, while praising my brothers, holding them in such high esteem, or boys will be boys kind of to do. But they did not like, my sister and my guardian did not like Mr. Aaron. They went through my journal and they went through my letters, because at this point too, Mr. Aaron had mailed me some letters when I had moved to the new town. He made one mistake. He had written in a letter, because we were talking about music and stuff like that, and we would call each other too. He'd always check in on me. He thought it was the best thing for me to get reestablished there. But he made a mistake in one of those letters, and he was a very religious man. God, did he screw up. He said, I love you. You can imagine what happens from here. My sister, my guardian, they went with it. Want to address something extra special and important. It's in the public school districts, the public school system. They're union, like the job I have now. It's not a lot of union jobs left. But in time, who knows, that may change. There's a reason why bureaucracies and huge capitalist companies do not like unions. Here's a to-do. It's called the Weingarten Rights. It's a Superior Court ruling established back in 1975. has to do with the National Labor and Relations Board taking a company, a retail store company, kind of like the old Woolworths, called J. Weingarten Incorporated. Has to do with a woman who was denied union representation when she was accused of stealing a small amount of food, which she did not do. It was a chicken dinner. Isn't that hilarious? Worth, back then, $2.25 or something. She wanted her union representation, and they kept denying her. They kept denying her. They kept denying her. They had security all over her, interrogating her over this one little thing. She wouldn't give up. And eventually, the whole case went to the United States Superior Court. And so, the Weingarten rights didn't develop into a law, but it got established as a ruling. So, if you got a union job and you're accused of anything, whether you did it or not, you can blow somebody's head off and you still have your Weingarten rights. Kind of like if you're being arrested, you have a right to your Miranda rights, okay? Same thing. And if the bosses deny this, they're breaking a superior court ruling. And that's the thing about having a steward involved, you know, or another coworker can go in as a witness to see things go down. Now, looking back on it, I piece it all together, and I can see it even more deep. My sister and my guardian harassed him at his home. I think specifically my sister. And they made accusations. They went to the principal. For what? For what? All of us could have sat down as a group. And my guardian approached me on this, and I flat out told her no. There is nothing. Nothing at all. Then she broke down crying and hugging me and got all emotional about it because something had happened to her when she was young. But that's another story. I'll tell you about that in the future. Incredible. He could have lost his job. But what they did not realize is that prior, in his earlier days of teaching, he got involved with the union. And he was involved in being a steward like me and knew the laws. And he stood his ground. But oh God, he could have lost his job. It could have ruined his career. And at the same time, because he had written a book prior, just a small book, and a small publishing company. No, it wasn't a small publishing company. It was a big one. Mainly dealt with romance novels and whatnot. But they had a certain, segment for science fiction. And they needed a science fiction book to fill in that gap. And that's how he got his first book published. But at the same time, he was writing another book. A book about 3 sisters. A mystery novel. And he was really working hard on it. You know, on top of taking care of the kids. And working 2 jobs. I don't know how he did it. But he wanted so well to put that forward and to be successful with it. And that was the main thing that we would talk about in our letters or on the phone. And I liked hearing about it. I liked hearing about his artistic endeavors, his goals. Because he really, since he was a child, all he wanted to do was write, And I was proud of him. I thought, this is an amazing story. I can't wait till you get it out. It's going to be great. And in a way, looking back, I think what I had gone through inspired him a little bit. And why not? He thought I was some crazy kid. That's another thing. In the letters, he referred to me as kid or kiddo. What the hell? It really pisses me off. I understand a lot of bad stuff goes on in the system. Look at what has been exposed today. My God. But something really important. You have to have proof. And it seems like with a lot of the abuse that's been exposed out there today, in the upper circles, there's some proof. But how are they dealing with it? I don't know. So, but that man, he helped me. He really did. In a way, he helped me from wanting to die. He kept me going. A total angel. Like the youth pastor that I talked about previously. You just couldn't see his wings. You go in with good intentions. You make one boo-boo, and what the hell happens? I don't know. That's the thing. Those things, people get falsely accused all the time. And it can create scarlet letter. It can ruin their lives. And then what? Especially with men. Sure, there are men in the past and men today who are terrible. But then what about the good ones out there? What's so ironic too? And I knew as soon as I had moved to the new town, my guardian's husband, he would joke around about it. He would kid around about it. He was one of those happy-go-lucky guys. And the popular guy in the family. I don't know why. I could see right through his crap. But he told me one day when we're alone, and my guardian, she's out at her job or something. I don't know. But he told me one day, because I kept saying, this is not happening. It's not true. Leave me alone. I'm going to go do this. I'll see you later. But he's like, I just wanted to tell you, I could do something to you if I wanted to. But I choose not to. But I kind of want to. Yeah. I don't know. And then going through all the grief, going through all the shock, I can still hear that echoing in my mind. There's monsters out there too, as well Babushka. In my mind, I was like, okay, out of the frying pan and into the fire. But Mr. Aaron, he ended up all right. He did the best he could. And I'll never forget him, We ended up in a relationship way into the future. I'll probably talk about that too, if you want me to. I'm kind of glad it ended. It was okay. I didn't really know him, Says a lot. But I could keep rambling on, but I'm going to stop now. And I love you, sweetheart. I hope your migraines are getting better. And we'll talk again later, okay? Or you can text me anytime. Love you. Remember to ring the bell. Talk to you later.